It's the Real News Network, and I'm Greg Wilpert in Baltimore. Last week, the Organization of American States, the OAS, narrowly voted to accept a representative of Venezuela's parallel government to the organization's Permanent Council. The vote put on display the extent to which the Caribbean island nations have become divided over their stance towards Venezuela. Previously, countries belonging to the Caribbean Community, or CARICOM, took a mostly unified position in supporting Venezuela. In last week's vote, though, 4 CARICOM countries, the Bahamas, Haiti, Jamaica, and St. Lucia, voted in favor of the anti-Venezuela resolution, and 4, Barbados, St. Kitts, and Nevis, Guyana, and Trinidad and Tobago, abstained. Joining me now to analyze what is going on with CARICOM and the U.S. efforts to distance these countries from Venezuela is Jeb Sprague. Jeb is a lecturer at the University of Virginia in the Department of Sociology and is author of the soon-to-be-released book, Globalizing the Caribbean. Thanks for joining us today, Jeb.
Thanks, Greg.
So I didn't mention the other 5 countries which actually voted for the OAS, that is with Venezuela. That was Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Suriname, and Grenada at the OAS meeting. Now, I just wanted to play a clip here of what the OAS ambassador from Antigua and Barbuda had to say about the resolution and in opposition of recognizing the parallel government's representative of Venezuela. Here's what he had to say.
The presentation of this resolution is part of a disturbing trend in which any simple majority of 18 member states can impose their will on all other member states. This trend, Chairman, assaults the fundamental ethos of this organization, which is to build consensus always in its decision-making. It is a sad day in the OAS when any group of member states can override the dissenting opinions of others simply to achieve their own desires.
Okay, so let's start with some background. After Chavez became president in 1999, CARICOM became quite close to Venezuela. Why is that? What has been going on, basically, in respect to the relationship between Venezuela and the CARICOM countries since Chavez's election?
Well, yeah, first of all, I think it's important to think about the history of CARICOM. How CARICOM was founded in the early 1970s as very much of a grouping of Caribbean states oriented towards doing business and economic ties in the region. But also, they've always had this idea of keeping the Caribbean as a zone of peace, of abiding by UN laws, but also the influence of the U.S., of the great powers in the region are, of course, very, very strong. Going back into the earlier attempts to create a stronger federation where countries would be pooling resources, attempts to make strong labor unions across the region were defeated in earlier decades. So CARICOM, going into the 1980s, you had the CBI, the Caribbean Basin Initiative, that Ronald Reagan created. Really, the biggest factor was as a counterinsurgency security apparatus to really lock down the Caribbean in that late stage of the Cold War. Now what we're seeing under Trump with this economic war, this U.S. state terrorism that's being launched so intensively against the people of Venezuela, Trump and his group, his allies around him, they want to isolate Venezuela in every possible way. And so part of this is in the Caribbean. And that's, Venezuela's coast is on the Caribbean. It's all its supply lines, its trade, its exports are going through the region. And so what we see now in the Caribbean really is a splintering of where these different states, who they're siding with. Petrocaribe was very important for a lot of states across the Caribbean region. Countries like Haiti, upwards of 90% of its funding for social investment in recent years came from Petrocaribe. Jamaica, the funding, this money that they were able to get through Venezuela, helped them to soften their debt repayments to the IMF. You look at plenty of other countries in the Eastern Caribbean, these smaller micro states. They really benefited a lot in building schools, auditoriums, funding healthcare, small entrepreneurs. The Venezuelan funding was a major resource for these countries. But in recent years, it started to dry up. And so Trump is now really trying to put his foot down on this situation in the Caribbean.
So before we get into the issue of the Trump administration and its efforts, I just want to briefly get you to talk about what was Petrocaribe for those who don't know.
So Petrocaribe was a Venezuelan program in which they provided this oil to different countries across the region in Central America and the Caribbean, where as long as oil stayed over $50 a barrel, these countries could earn the profits that they could make off of selling oil, they could keep and pay back at a much later date. So they only had to pay a small amount of the total to the Venezuelan state. So it was a way of them building up their savings, and this money then would be used for social investment programs, for plugging holes in their budgets, and a lot of other beneficial things for these governments in the region.
Okay, and getting back to the Trump administration, what do we know about what the Trump administration has been doing in order to peel support for Venezuela off of CARICOM and to peel them individual countries away from their support for Venezuela?
So across the region, over recent decades, there's really this push for these countries to become more globally competitive. They're operating in this ocean of global capitalism, where they're trying to attract transnational investors from around the world. And so Trump is really playing that to his advantage. And there's different situations, different particularities, histories, the local context in all of these countries. So in Jamaica and the Dominican Republic, there were oil fineries that had been partially financed by Venezuela. So Petrojam in Jamaica, another oil refinery in the Dominican Republic, Refidomosa, I believe is the name, which were both 49% owned by Venezuela. And so what Trump now has done with those two countries is say, hey, well, let's hand over that 49% to the self-proclaimed President Juan Guaido in Venezuela, and then you can keep this debt and a lot of the money now that you won't be paying back the constitutional government in Venezuela. And so it's a win-win situation for these conservative, the conservative Prime Minister Andrew Holness in Jamaica, and the conservative President Danilo Medina in the Dominican Republic. A lot of these governments too, they're trying to get Trump to eliminate different export taxes, different tariffs. The Dominican president is he wants to have their country manufacturing all of the boots for the U.S. military. They were asking for a special emergency account for natural disasters for the U.S. to finance. Other of these countries, so for example, the Bahamas, which is one of the countries of the tax haven archipelago in the region, it's highly integrated with the U.S. economy. It's had a U.S. Navy base there for many years. It's a playground for the wealthy, people like Richard Branson, the Walt Disney Company. They own their own islands in the Bahamas. So the Bahamas essentially doesn't have its own foreign policy, and it's headed by conservative Prime Minister Hubert Minnis. Another one of the countries, or the other two, then would be St. Lucia and Haiti. St. Lucia, if you watch the video at the summit in Mar-a-Lago with the 5 heads of state meeting with Trump, Prime Minister Alan Chastanet is the first person that Trump calls on. And if you hear him speak, he speaks with an American accent. He's a white man, a wealthy business family on this island, right, that is majority Black Caribbeans. He's one of the more conservative presidents in the region. And so he's close with a lot of wealthy, powerful people. And then the last final country that was at the summit is Haiti. and the President Jovenel Moïse. Your viewers are probably, have seen the news on Haiti, how you have this government that is really suffering a crisis of legitimacy, one of the lowest turnouts of any presidential election in recent years in the Western Hemisphere and even worldwide. The government has used more and more repression against massive protests, some of the largest protests in the country since the 1980s. And also, it's very well known, the Petrocaribe Scandal. So the Haitian government, especially under Michel Martelly, the predecessor to Jovenel Moïse, who's from the same political party, the Tête Calais, the bald-headed party, under his government, a lot of money was stolen. They believe around $2 billion of over $4 billion was stolen by this Haitian government now, which is now basically stabbed in the back Venezuela, the government that was trying to provide solidarity to Haiti. And so a lot of people in Haiti are very upset at Jovenel Moïse for really bending the knee to Trump.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there for now. I just want to note, though, before we close, that the resolution ultimately, I thought it was very interesting. It's basically specified that the representative of the self-proclaimed president, Juan Guaido, was actually going to be a representative of the National Assembly. And this is something that Jamaica introduced as an amendment in the last minute. And it really fundamentally changed the resolution, which is kind of interesting, and softened it, I think, probably so that more of these Caribbean countries could vote in favor of it. In other words, the Guaido representative is not a representative of the Venezuelan state, but of the National Assembly, which is totally unprecedented. No other country is represented by a National Assembly, and it didn't get rid of the current representative from Venezuela, the state official representative. So anyway, it's kind of a complication that developed out of that OAS meeting. But we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks again, Jeb, for having joined us today. Lecturer at the University of Virginia in the Department of Sociology.
Thanks so much, Greg.
And thank you for joining the Real News Network.